November 10th, 2001. Less than 2 months after the Twin Towers fell, American intelligence picks up a signal that changes everything. Osama bin Laden, the most wanted man on earth, is moving. Not hiding. Not cowering in some distant safe house. Moving. In broad daylight. Through the streets of Jalalabad, Afghanistan. 200 pickup trucks. A convoy so large it looks like a military parade. He's heading east, toward the mountains, toward a place the Soviets learned to fear 2 decades earlier. Tora Bora. The name means black dust in Pashto. It's a fortress carved into the white mountains by nature and reinforced by war. 14,000 feet of jagged peaks, ice-choked ravines, and cave systems that burrow miles into the earth. And bin Laden knows every inch of it, because he helped build it. In the 1980s, when the Soviets occupied Afghanistan, the CIA funneled millions to the Mujahideen fighters resisting the invasion. Bin Laden was one of them. He used Saudi money and American support to turn Tora Bora into an underground labyrinth, bunkers, weapons depots, escape tunnels. Now, in 2001, he's going back. The Americans know it. The CIA knows it. And for the first time since September 11th, they have him cornered. Or so they think. November 17th. A small team of CIA operatives, codenamed Jawbreaker, arrives in the foothills of Tora Bora. They set up a base in a local schoolhouse. No heat, no running water, just satellite phones, cold rations, and a mission that's about to define the entire war. Find bin Laden, kill or capture him, end this before it begins. The team leader sends a message back to Langley. We're in position. We need boots on the ground. Now. But the boots don't come. Not yet. What does come is a doctrine, a strategy, a decision made thousands of miles away that will haunt this operation for decades. The light footprint. Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld and General Tommy Franks, the architects of the Afghanistan invasion, have a vision. They want to avoid the Soviet mistake. They don't want images of American tanks rolling through Afghan villages. They don't want occupation. They want precision, minimalism. Afghan faces doing Afghan work. So instead of sending thousands of US troops to seal the mountain passes, they send money, millions of dollars, to local warlords, to militia commanders with names like Hazrat Ali and Mohammed Zaman. The plan is simple. Let the Afghans do the fighting. Let the Americans do the bombing. But the men on the ground see the flaw immediately. These warlords aren't loyal to America. They're loyal to whoever pays them more. And Al-Qaeda has deep pockets. November 30th. A small coalition finally arrives. Delta Force operators, British SBS commandos, CIA paramilitary officers, roughly 100 Western special operators in total, against an estimated 1,000 to 2,000 Al-Qaeda fighters dug into the ridgelines above. The math doesn't add up. Everyone knows it. But the orders are clear. Work with the Afghan militias. Coordinate the assault. Use airpower to compensate for numbers. The Americans set up observation posts on the lower slopes. They start calling in strikes. B-52 bombers, F-15 fighter jets, cruise missiles launched from warships in the Arabian Sea. The bombardment is relentless. 700,000 pounds of ordnance will eventually fall on Tora Bora. Bombs so powerful they create their own weather systems. The infamous BLU-82 Daisy Cutter, a 15,000-pound monster designed to vaporize everything within 600 feet. On TV screens back in America, it looks devastating. It looks like victory. But in the mountains, the reality is different. The caves are too deep, the ravines too narrow, the terrain too broken. Al-Qaeda fighters watch the bombers circle overhead, then simply move to the next ridge, the next cave, the next tunnel that the Soviets couldn't find and the Americans can't see. And somewhere in that maze, broadcasting on a handheld radio, is Osama bin Laden. If you want to see how this story ends, and trust me, you need to see how this ends, hit that subscribe button now. Because what happens next is one of the most controversial moments in modern military history. December the 1st, Gary Burnson, the CIA team leader on the ground, sends an urgent request up the chain of command. He wants 800 U.S. Army Rangers, not to fight, just to block the passes. Tora Bora sits against the Pakistani border like a theater with a back door. There are over 150 mountain trails snaking through the White Mountains into Pakistan's tribal areas. Goat paths, smuggler routes, escape hatches invisible from the air. Burnson knows that if they don't seal those exits, this operation is just pushing Al-Qaeda from one country to another. He makes his case clearly. We have the target cornered. We need bodies to hold the perimeter. Send the Rangers. The request goes to General Tommy Franks at Central Command Headquarters in Florida. Franks denies it. The reason given: strategic concerns, resource allocation, the light footprint doctrine. But the men freezing in the Afghan mud hear something else. They hear Washington choosing optics over results. They hear a military afraid of looking like occupiers while the world's most wanted terrorist slips through their fingers. December 5th. The Afghan militias finally launch their ground offensive. It goes exactly as badly as the Americans feared. The warlords move slowly. They stop to pray. They stop to negotiate. They stop when their fighters get tired or when the money runs low. Meanwhile, Al-Qaeda holds the high ground. They've had weeks to prepare. They know every firing position, every choke point, every ambush site. The militias take casualties and pull back. Then they advance again the next day. Then they pull back again. It's not a battle. It's theater. And the clock is ticking. December 9th. Delta Force A Squadron arrives on the front lines to take direct tactical command. These are America's elite. Tier 1 operators trained for exactly this kind of manhunt. They immediately begin adjusting the airstrikes, repositioning the Afghan units, pushing harder toward the cave complexes. And then, on December 10th, they get confirmation. A Delta Force operator is monitoring radio frequencies when he hears it. A voice, calm, distinct, speaking in Arabic. It's bin Laden. He's talking to his fighters, giving them encouragement, telling them to hold their positions. The operator triangulates the signal. Less than 10 kilometers away, somewhere in the canyon system directly ahead. For the first time since September 11th, the United States military knows, with absolute certainty, exactly where Osama bin Laden is standing. The operator looks up at the dark peaks towering above him, snow-covered, silent, massive. He's right there, just a few miles away. So close they can hear his voice through the static, and yet, impossibly far. Because between them and him are 14,000 feet of vertical rock, ice storms, minefields, and 1,000 Al-Qaeda fighters willing to die protecting their leader. The Delta operators request permission to move immediately, to go in with everything they have, but they're told to wait, to coordinate with the Afghan militias, to stick to the plan. So they wait. And bin Laden keeps talking. December 12th. Everything stops. The Afghan militia commanders, Hazrat Ali and Mohammed Zaman, announce that Al-Qaeda wants to negotiate a surrender. They call for a 12-hour ceasefire. The Delta Force officers are stunned. This is the moment. This is when you press the advantage. When the enemy is cornered, you don't give them time to think. But the Afghan commanders insist. They say it's about honor, about giving the enemy a chance to surrender with dignity. The CIA officers on the ground know better. They know it's a ruse. They know Al-Qaeda isn't surrendering. They know that 12 hours of darkness is all bin Laden needs to move his core leadership out of the kill zone. But they can't overrule the Afghan commanders. Because this is their country, their fight, their decision. At least that's what the doctrine says. So the bombing stops. The roar of the B-52s fades into silence. The Afghan militias lower their weapons and walk back down the mountain. And in the Tora Bora caves, Osama bin Laden and his inner circle prepare to move. The Delta operators sit in the cold, watching the stars come out over the peaks. knowing exactly what's happening and powerless to stop it. One of them will later say it felt like watching a bank robbery in slow motion while your hands are tied behind your back. December 14th. Intelligence reports indicate that bin Laden has written his final will and testament. He's preparing for either death or escape. The bombing resumes. The Afghan militias push forward again, but the urgency is gone. The moment has passed. Delta Force continues to intercept radio chatter, but bin Laden's voice is no longer among the transmissions. The commanders on the ground send increasingly desperate messages to Central Command. He's moving. We need to block the border. Send reinforcements now. The answers from Florida remain the same. Negative. Maintain current posture. Continue working with local forces. It's a masterclass in how bureaucracy kills speed. How decision-making in a warm, brightly lit office 9,000 miles away cannot match the reality of snow and bullets and a closing window. If you're starting to feel the frustration these operators felt, you're not alone. Stay with me, because the next 48 hours will determine the entire course of the war on terror. December 16th, the Afghan militias finally break through to the main cave complexes. They find them empty. Blankets still warm, food half-eaten, weapons abandoned, but no fighters, no leadership, no bin Laden. The Delta operators push higher into the mountains, following tracks in the snow. They find evidence of a hasty retreat. Equipment dumps, blood trails, signs of wounded men being carried. The trail leads east, toward the Pakistani border, toward the high passes. Specifically, toward the Agam Pass, a brutal snow-choked route through the Saft-Ko range that sits at over 14,000 feet. It's the kind of terrain that doesn't show up on satellite imagery. Narrow, steep, hidden under cloud cover for days at a time. And it leads directly into the Parashinar region of Pakistan. The Americans request permission to pursue across the border. Denied. They request that Pakistani forces set up roadblocks on the other side. The Pakistanis promise cooperation. They deploy the Frontier Corps, a paramilitary force theoretically loyal to Islamabad. But the Frontier Corps is recruited from the same tribes that populate the mountains. The same tribes that have been smuggling goods and people across this border for centuries. The same tribes that view Al-Qaeda not as terrorists, but as fellow Muslims resisting foreign invasion. So when small groups of armed Arabs start appearing in Pakistani villages wrapped in blankets, suffering from frostbite and altitude sickness, the Frontier Corps looks the other way, or they help them disappear into the tribal areas. December 17th. The Battle of Tora Bora officially ends. The Afghan militias declare victory. They've captured the mountain. They've seized weapons caches and propaganda materials. They've killed an unknown number of Al-Qaeda fighters. But the primary objective, the only objective that really mattered, has failed. Osama bin Laden is gone. The post-battle analysis will take months. The recriminations will take years. But the men who were there know exactly what happened. They had him. They heard his voice. They knew his location. They had the firepower to obliterate anything that moved on that mountain. But they didn't have the bodies to hold the perimeter. They didn't have the authority to cross the border. They didn't have commanders willing to risk the optics of a larger American footprint. So they had to rely on Afghan warlords whose loyalties were negotiable and Pakistani forces whose sympathies were questionable. And in that gap between capability and authority, the most wanted man in the world walked away. The most widely accepted reconstruction, supported by the 2009 Senate Foreign Relations Committee report, puts bin Laden on foot or mule through the Agam Pass. He's traveling with a small group, maybe 10 men, maybe 20. They're guided by local tribesmen who know paths that have never been mapped. Routes that hug the ridgelines where the snow is too deep for vehicle patrols and too high for thermal imaging. They move at night. They rest in caves during the day. They avoid the valleys where American drones are circling. And on one of those nights, probably between December 12th and 15th, when winter storms grounded U.S. aircraft and obscured satellite coverage, they crossed the invisible line between Afghanistan and Pakistan. No fanfare, No last stand? No Hollywood ending? Just a small line of figures moving through deep snow at 14,000 feet. Tiny specks against an endless white landscape. And then, at the crest of the mountain, they vanish into the clouds. The back door closes. The failure at Tora Bora will echo for nearly a decade. It turns a 3-month manhunt into a 10-year obsession. Bin Laden becomes a ghost, a symbol. Proof that the world's most powerful military can be evaded by a man with nothing but faith, terrain, and patience. Al-Qaeda turns his escape into a propaganda masterpiece. They release videos of bin Laden in the mountains, healthy and defiant, mocking American weakness. They use it to recruit a new generation of fighters. The message is clear. America can drop all the bombs it wants, but it can't hold ground. It can't control borders. It can't win wars where patience matters more than firepower. And they're not wrong. The Pakistan problem becomes permanent. The federally administered tribal areas, FATA, becomes the new safe haven for Al-Qaeda and Taliban leadership. It's technically part of Pakistan, but Islamabad has virtually no control there. The tribes govern themselves according to centuries-old codes. The terrain is impassable. The loyalty is to clan, not country. And the United States cannot simply invade an allied nation to chase down terrorists. So the war on terror metastasizes. Drone strikes become the primary tool. Predator and Reaper drones circling over Pakistani villages, firing Hellfire missiles at suspected compounds. Sometimes they hit the right target. Often they hit weddings, funerals, schools. Each civilian casualty creates 10 new recruits for the very groups America is trying to eliminate. It's a strategy of perpetual motion, action without resolution, violence without victory. And it all traces back to those critical 72 hours in December 2001, when the United States had Osama bin Laden cornered and chose not to commit the resources necessary to finish the job. The official explanations vary depending on who you ask. General Tommy Franks will later say that the intelligence was never definitive enough to justify a large-scale deployment. Donald Rumsfeld will argue that flooding Afghanistan with American troops would have turned the population against the U.S. and created a Soviet-style occupation. CIA officers will say they were ignored. Delta Force operators will say they were handcuffed. Afghan militia commanders will shrug and say they did their best. And somewhere in all those conflicting narratives is the truth. The truth that wars are won or lost not just by tactics, but by decisions. Not just by soldiers, but by strategists sitting in climate-controlled offices, making calculations about optics and politics and legacy. The truth that the light footprint doctrine, designed to avoid the appearance of empire, ended up extending a war by 2 decades because it prioritized perception over results. The truth that relying on proxy forces with conflicting loyalties is a gamble that almost always fails when it matters most. The truth that when you know where your enemy is, when you have the firepower and the personnel to eliminate him, and you choose not to because of bureaucratic caution, you don't get a second chance. Osama bin Laden will remain free for another 9.5 years. He'll eventually be tracked to a compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan, a city just a few hours' drive from the mountains where he vanished. On May 2, 2011, Navy SEAL Team 6 will finally do what Delta Force couldn't accomplish in 2001. They'll fly into Pakistan without permission. They'll raid the compound. They'll put 2 bullets in bin Laden's head, and the world will celebrate like it's the end of something. But by then, the damage is done. The war on terror has already consumed trillions of dollars, hundreds of thousands of lives, and the stability of an entire region. ISIS has risen from the ashes of Al-Qaeda in Iraq. The Taliban are resurgent in Afghanistan. The tribal areas of Pakistan are more radicalized than ever. And all of it, every drone strike, every suicide bombing, every destabilized government can trace a direct line back to that winter night in 2001 when America had the chance to end this war before it truly began. So what went wrong at Tora Bora? 7 failures, 7 decisions that compounded into disaster. First, the light footprint doctrine. the strategic choice to minimize American presence and maximize Afghan participation. It looked good on paper. It avoided the Soviet comparison. But it sacrificed effectiveness for optics. Second, the denial of reinforcements. Gary Burnson asked for 800 Rangers to block the passes. He didn't get them. Not because they weren't available, but because someone decided the risk wasn't worth the commitment. Third, reliance on unreliable proxies. The Afghan warlords were paid millions to do a job they had no real incentive to complete. They negotiated when they should have fought. They delayed when they should have pressed. And some almost certainly took bribes to let al-Qaeda slip away. Fourth, the false ceasefire. 12 hours of darkness on December 12th. 12 hours when bombing stopped and al-Qaeda leadership moved. The Delta operators knew it was a trick, but they couldn't stop it. Fifth, failure to seal the border. The assumption that Pakistani forces would catch anyone trying to cross was naive at best. The border was porous. The tribes were sympathetic. The frontier corps was compromised. Sixth, over-reliance on airpower. 700,000 pounds of bombs sounds impressive. It looks devastating on thermal imagery. But in terrain like Tora Bora, all caves and ravines and vertical rock, air power alone can't hold ground. It can destroy, it can kill, but it can't occupy. Seventh, intelligence to action lag. By the time confirmed sightings and intercepted radio transmissions made it from the front lines to Central Command in Florida and back again, the target had moved. Tactical commanders needed the authority to act on battlefield intelligence in real time. They didn't have it. 7 failures. 7 missed opportunities. And one result. The world's most wanted terrorist walked out of the biggest manhunt in modern history. But here's the thing that haunts the operators who were there. It didn't have to be complicated. They didn't need perfect intelligence. They didn't need advanced technology. They didn't need some brilliant tactical innovation. They just needed boots on the ground, 800 Rangers holding the passes, or 1,000 Marines forming a cordon along the border, or even just the authority for Delta Force to pursue without waiting for permission from 9,000 miles away. The United States had all of those things: the personnel, the equipment, the capability. What it didn't have was the will to commit them, because commitment means risk. It means putting American soldiers in harm's way. It means the possibility of casualties that would look bad on the evening news. And in December 2001, with the war only 2 months old and victory seeming inevitable, no one wanted to be the commander who asked for more troops and ended up with body bags. So they chose caution. And caution let Osama bin Laden escape. The Senate Foreign Relations Committee investigated Tora Bora in 2009. Their report was damning. It concluded that the failure to capture or kill bin Laden at Tora Bora was a direct result of the decision to rely on Afghan militias and limit American troop involvement. It stated that commanders on the ground had the intelligence and the justification to request significant reinforcements. It confirmed that those requests were denied, and it laid the responsibility for that decision at the feet of the civilian and military leadership in Washington. But by 2009, those leaders were long gone. Rumsfeld had resigned in 2006. Franks had retired in 2003. And the war they'd designed to be swift and surgical had metastasized into the longest conflict in American history. The men who were at Tora Bora don't talk about it much. Some have written books. Some have given interviews. But most stay quiet. Because what's the point? You can't change the past. You can't rewrite history. You can't bring back the thousands of people who died in the decade between December 2001 and May 2011 because one man was allowed to escape. All you can do is remember. Remember that wars are won by commitment, not by half measures. Remember that good strategy executed poorly is just bad strategy. Remember that technology and firepower and precision munitions mean nothing if you're not willing to put people in position to finish the job. And remember that when you have your enemy cornered, when you can hear his voice through the static and triangulate his position to within 10 kilometers, you don't ask for permission. You act, because the window closes fast, and some opportunities never come again. Somewhere in the White Mountains, there's a pass that few people know exists. It's steep, snow-choked, invisible from above. And on a winter night in December 2001, a small group of men crossed it. They were cold, they were wounded, they were exhausted, but they were free, and the world would burn for another decade because of it. The back door was always open. We just refused to close it.